What up, what up? What's up, folks? I'm LazyStudio, and I'll be doing a tutorial on building a combat character. This video will go over the design process as well as other details during that process that really help you sell your designs. Combat is a very prominent part of my comic and something I think deeply about when it comes to creating characters. You can find the video below. Oh, not the video. You can find the link below to read up on the script and just follow it along that way. Or you can just watch the video and click on the chapters and follow it that way. Definitely check out the comic if you haven't already. It's www.kiwipunchcomic.com. You'll find a link for that below as well. And I hope you enjoy this tutorial. You can find other ones on the YouTube channel. Appreciate it. And let's get into it. Alright, here's where it all begins. I'll do a little writing or setup, some references and a reference page to like really start brainstorming my ideas. I use Pure Ref here on a second monitor, and I get all my references together and just drag and drop them over in there. It's a free program. You can check it out. It's pretty useful, but it's not necessary for your workflow. You could set it up as a JPEG or do anything like that. Sometimes you don't even need to follow through with an entire page for this design, but I built a small one as an example. So first up, we have world. This is probably the most important part about designing a character. What world are they part of? Ninjas, pirates, future, past, high fantasy, space, gangsters. This is all stuff that comes in and like really can affect your designs drastically. For this example, we'll be using the world of Kiwi Punch. My comic takes place in a crime-ridden city, and these characters are part of a combat sports team. Anthropomorphic creatures replace humans in this world. Everything is somewhat the same as normal society here. Guns, swords, super strength are commonplace though. With these world traits in mind, it really sets you on a distinct path with characters. This city specifically is predominantly like mammals as well, so that'll play into my choice of animals that I use when I'm creating these designs. Since I've already picked up the animals for these characters, you can see them in my reference page I've set up along with some other athletic references. Story. So next up we have story. This is where things start to like get built, and we have ideas for different characters and how they're going to be developed. The sports team the sport this team plays is basically capture the flag, but much more violent. Blunt weapons are allowed and randomly scattered through the arena. You receive points by capturing the flag and returning it back to your base. Only 5 players are allowed on the field at once. There's a few more rules, but we won't get into that info as it doesn't really pertain to these designs right now. Our main characters end up having to compete in one of these matches in order to make some money. The team they go against, however, is actually one of the top ranking teams in the pro circuit, and our main characters are taking them on in hopes of generating even more money. I'll get into more info on that if you just read the comic. It'll come up around chapter 4 or 5. The comic isn't predominantly about this sport, though. It does go around a mobster, gangster, mafia kind of feel, and is more about that, but they do step out of that to go into this arena to do some gambling, basically. So I've already scripted their interactions with the MCs, or the main characters, and I have their stories written out so far. So for me, this won't be that complicated as far as story goes, but it is very important that you start to build your characters in that way. When you're working from scratch on a character, no matter the world or story, you need to have a general personality set up for them beforehand. They can have quirks or traits that you can add to their design to help sell their character. These kind of things can range from physical handicaps, scars, color mutations, a nervous habit such as like chewing, maybe they always have something in their mouth, or even emotional and mental characteristics like superiority complex, or maybe they're a psychopath, or they have too much empathy. Building a character's personality beforehand will really help you guide you on what they should wear, what they use in combat, and how they handle said combat. For example, the hyena we'll be creating is female to male trans. They are called Alexi. This means, but physically, we need to have some personality showing such of like how their build is. They're still the vice captain of the team and are extremely strong and brawly. So I want the build to reflect both their physical capabilities and their life choices. Feminine features, but I still want a little bit of masculine in there, so it needs to have a nice middle ground. And then we sprinkle in some personality traits on top of that to give them some more depth. Competitive, a little harsh, blunt, maybe some quirky quips they'll toss around to opponents. Even that out with some nicer traits next. Maybe they'll talk a lot of crap, but they never really like talk about somebody's personality or make it too personal. They only talk about their skills at the sport. This, even though small, can impact a character's design Maybe they never use a sharp weapon. Maybe they're a defensive character because they're a bit on the nicer side and don't like to hurt anybody, so they're just bigger on defense. And this can, like I said, build your character and change how you develop this character. And this is where story really affects design. Alright, so next up we have shape. So you want a dominant, scary character, but don't want them to have that usual big, bad wolf look? Well, this is where playing with shapes can come in handy. For these characters, I've somewhat decided on their animals already based on their personalities and their role in the story. However, their actual abilities and combat expertise are influenced by this choice as well. So this is something that makes a very big impact on your design concept. If you have a high fantasy elf in large hulking armor, for instance, like they're obviously going to be looked at as a tank or a bruiser or some kind of defensive character or just that berserker character. And you want to think about that when it comes to design. Now, of course, this doesn't always have to be the case. You could break the meta and have an original vibe with that character. But it's important that that first scene where they show up really explains a lot without you having to use words, because that's what the point of a design is. You're supposed to be able to see it, and it like tells you what you're looking at without you having to put in a whole bunch of backstory and things like that. Like you want it to be displayed. So during my design, you'll see me use this moose to play with the usual meta that is generally followed. Sherry's going to be huge and tall, but what I'm going for is a more calm and sturdy feel. He's the captain, but he's also a defense specialist who defends the flag. And since this is a combat thing, he'll be defending against people who are either large or fast or strong. So he needs to have some kind of way to stop not only attacks, but stop people trying to sneak by. So that's where a lot of his design is going to come into play. His personality is pretty tame and polite when he's not in a match. So thinking of shapes ahead of time can really help with your workflow here. Function. So function is equally important to these concepts. It's not always necessary depending on your style, but functionality can help with designing details and picking weapons or the outfit. What is the function of the character? What's their purpose? Are they defensive, offensive, and so on? If they are wielding a big weapon, do they have a room to swing it? Do they have some way to hold it while resting? Do their belts, are they functional? Do they make sense for that mage or support character? When I'm creating a character from scratch, having a few of these things in mind leads me where I want to go. I'll even get some references of outfits, clothing, gear set up in order to help influence my design. For this one, we have jerseys saved since this is a team, and they need to have functional yet cohesive outfits. I also have some gloves laid out here, some shoe ideas, and some weapon ideas for one of the characters that is a weapon specialist and likes to use the weapons that are going to be scattered throughout the arena. So with all that said, that is a brief rundown of like the concept building and doing things like that. You can look over this image and you can kind of get an idea of where I'm going to go with this, or you can come back and look at this and see where I drew inspiration from throughout the video as I work. From here on out, it'll be all images and artwork being done. Everything's drawn from original other than the image materials that I'm dragging and dropping in, which I drew myself as well. I'll be going over a little bit of that. Hopefully this helps you break things down. Again, the program I use is called PureRef. It's free. You can check that out and play around with it. You can save it as a JPEG from there, or you can just save it as a PureRef file and come back to it. But this does really help out with the workflow, and I keep that on a second monitor. Shoo! Okay, here we go. Y'all ready? All right. Once you've gotten your basic concepts prepared, it's time to start your design process. The key element to focus on during this stage is just getting something down on paper. What you throw down will not always be your final design. Sometimes it may take a few attempts to get what you feel fits right. So I start out here with some bases that I've already prepared. These are just some general body shapes with some 3-4 poses that I use when doing quick designs. I highly recommend having these set up as a material. That way you can save you a lot of time and you can streamline your work process. Saving them as a material allows me to just drag and drop them in. I make them a lower opacity so I can draw over them, and I generally don't use them as the actual design itself. They're just a general guideline to help speed up the process. These shouldn't be overused for customers or similar situations that revolve around business. Whenever you're doing business, of course, you want somebody to have an original piece. You don't want to just completely trace something you've already done. Really don't want to trace somebody else's work. That's a big no-no. Don't do that. You really should be past that point. But here I am going to use these to speed up my process, because this is how I can get designs done really fast, get some designs fleshed out, which is amazing for this process. When I create my designs, I usually use them as character sheets for my comics. I toss them into my character reference page, which saves me a lot of time looking over and seeing these designs, details, and even the tones and shading, or like shapes that I want to, not shapes, the shades that I want to use in the comic. So I'll save them as black and white, and you'll probably see that here. I'll save this as a black and white or a monochrome, however you want to take that. And that's the reason I leave most of my character sheets colorless, and it will save me a lot of time in the end. So I definitely recommend doing that. Moving on to the actual design process now, I'm just fleshing out some basic shapes. Since I've already built my world for this comic and the characters are scripted, we have a general idea of each one's personality. We also have an idea of what memo we'll be using for these characters. However, that can sometimes change when we're in the middle of a design. Here I've decided a moose for the captain. The captain is a laid-back character who isn't very imposing. He'll have a slight slouch to him to help sell that idea. These are little details that can really help your design. Posture plays a big part of expressing body language. And with that said, I actually do really think it is an important part to study a little bit on some body language and how that can affect things. As you see here, I'm giving them smaller legs. I want to play up the whole moose look because they are very tall and their upper body is very, very bulky. They have a hump on their back, so I gave them really wide traps that go up almost into his neck. I am going to give him long arms as well. My original idea was for him to be a huge hulking buff guy, but I kind of changed that design when I started understanding the character as I drew or wrote him out. So now he's going to have this long, lanky look, slouched, very relaxed posture, and not very intimidating, but still intimidating because of his just raw size. He is going to be very strong. He's not going to be a super slow character, but of course he's not going to be as fast as, say, like a cheetah or something like that. But these are just things that you want to think about whenever you're doing these designs, because it can really impact how you create these characters, especially when it comes to combat. So because he's a defensive character, he needs to have that reach. He needs to have that imposing, dominating feeling. So that way, whenever somebody's attacking him, he's very durable, or if they're trying to get by him, he's got this long reach. And that's where the combat design comes in. So next up, we have the hyena. This is the vice captain of the team, and they're very brawly. So I'm looking to express that in their design. The hair, the outfit, and the overall physique really need to show clearly so that a reader can understand the design quickly, especially for characters like these who won't have a whole bunch of backstory. My comic is only about 16 chapters long if it all goes accordingly, and these characters only show up for 2 chapters. So I really need to create a design that's easy for people to read. They understand the character, they get a sense of the character's personality, all within that first initial scene that they see this character. That will save me time, and I won't have to take all of this time using dialogue to express and show you the character's personality. So that's really important whenever you're trying to build a character, especially for this character since they are trans. I really want to show the female to male transition, and I gave them a smaller waist. I gave them a physique that shows that they're very strong and brawly, and they'll also be on the taller side. Lastly, we're going to shape out the rabbit. He's the superstar of the team and utilizes speed to win matches by scoring. He'll have a very flashy personality, and during the shaping, I had the idea to give him, or to make him an amputee, as you'll see in a moment. It wouldn't affect his main function, which was to be just a point scorer, since he only needs one hand to capture the flag. This also gives him more believability with his personality, since he would be very popular for being a superstar, especially with a physical handicap. This could come into play when combat starts too, and even add some story depth later in the comic if I do end up bringing some of his story elements back. But yeah, it's a really unique way to approach something. And when I thought about combat, he doesn't need 2 hands. He could also be doing hand-to-hand well, I guess for his case it would be hand combat, but he'd be using his legs primarily since he is a rabbit, fast. He's going to have amazing speed. And I think that's something that'll really be sold with this design. It's not affecting his actual speed, but it will affect his hand-to-hand physical combat using hands. But that just, again, showcases a lot of different elements within a small design. Alright, so we're hopping back into detailing. So this section is called slamming down the details. Slamming down some details. Anyway, the general shapes are done for our characters. Next up, we'll be playing around with some details. As you can see, I like to hop around between my designs. When I'm working with a team or a group of characters who will be seen with each other a lot, I like to design them together. So if they have 4 or 5 characters and they're all going to be together a lot, you really need to have all of their designs speak differently and be a they need to the shapes need to be different. You need to have very nicely designed characters. So this group is a team, and I wanted to express that, and I wanted to make sure that the main 3 characters we're going to see from this team are going to have designs that read really differently from each other. This helps so that your characters aren't too similar, and sometimes if you're after a cohesive look and sometimes you aren't, it really just depends on the story or the function of the characters you're designing. But hopping around definitely will help with that, zooming out, looking at your other characters, working from a smaller composition. That way you can really sell shapes. So here we're just fleshing out some of the details of the hyena. They do have fluffy cheeks. I'm trying to incorporate some of the basic animal designs, but of course still straying away from that a little bit. This is still art, and you're able to express things how you want to express it. I'm just trying to grasp the general feel of a hyena. I'm not going for a realistic look here. We're working with anthropomorphic characters, so they're not going to be that realistic anyway. Here I'm trying to design and get a weapon down. I eventually came up with the idea that this person would use like a club or a mace as their main weapon, but they would be the weapon specialist of the team as the vice captain. So their main focus is offense and brawling. In this game or sport, you are allowed to knock out your opponent, which would take 2 minutes off of their timer before they can send in another player, which of course that's a huge, or I think it's 1 minute. But that's a huge advantage. If you can knock somebody out, they're out for a whole minute. The other team only has 4. You have 5 players. You could score a lot of points in that time frame, since it's a very physical sport. And since this city is based on a lot of crime and mafia syndicates and gangsters and stuff like that, this kind of sport is heavily like they gamble a lot on this sport, and that comes into a lot of things. Like I think that is very important when you're designing and building these worlds, is to have everything kind of make sense to you. You don't have to flesh out every single detail, like the legality of it or things like that, unless you want to, or unless it's going to play something in that. So here I'm designing the hair. I'm trying to sell a personality. I want them to be very spunky, and you can tell that they're very aggressive, and they'll be talking a lot of crap in the series, as I've mentioned before. So I just really want to sell their personality with the hairstyle that I pick. And I had a couple of hairstyles in my reference sheet. I end up going with a little bit of a spiky kind of mix of a hairstyle, and you can see through here I'm playing around with the design. Don't be scared to mess with the design and just see where it goes. Sometimes you might end up putting 10-15 minutes on a hairstyle and just not even like it, and that's fine, and that happens. That's what we're here for. For me, I am basically speeding through this a little bit faster than usual because these are side characters. If it was a main character, I would take all the time I could take and make sure I really had everything flawless. But for me, as long as the design reads pretty well and I'm pretty overall happy with it, I'm not going to sit there and design and design and design and waste all of my time on characters that are only going to show up for 2 chapters. That's why they are side characters or background characters, however you'd like to describe them. But for me, this character is a very important character. I think representation is important, but is overly done, or is done in a very cringy way. So for this to be a trans character, and it's not the only trans character, there are others, but this is one of the more predominantly flashy trans characters because they are a pro athlete in this and a vice captain. So they are in a position of power, but I don't like when it's overdone. I don't want the whole character's personality trait to just be that they are trans. They are still a person and have their own personality traits, and I think that is important to convey when you're designing, especially combat characters, without having to just be blatantly on the nose about it. And I think that is a really, it's just really overdone and done really poorly with really bad taste. Like, you can have a character that is a strong character, and I don't mean strong as in physical, I just mean strong as in well written, without them being too on the nose. This character's whole bit isn't just because they're trans, it's because they're a good athlete, they're strong, and they're good at what they do, and that's why they hold their position. And I want to convey that. I don't want it to feel cheesy. I don't want it to feel fake. All the characters in Kiwi Punch have to be very believable and realistic, relatable characters that aren't too overdone. just like in a mobster movie, there are exaggerated characters, and of course, this is still a comic and a story, so there is going to be exaggeration to certain things or certain elements to the story. But I think what's really important is keeping some semblance of real life so that it's not too overdone. Because that can really push people away when they're enjoying the story or enjoying a character, is when it's just too overdone. So next I'm hopping into fleshing out the rabbit. The moose and hyena have some general things that make them stand out and give their design some weight, but the rabbit has a pretty normal build. So I really want to sell the flashy bit with his clothing here. I go for a star look a track star look, which kind of fits in with the outfit. At first it was going to be a one piece outfit, but it didn't really feel right. So I went ahead and made it a shirt. That way that actually comes from a commercial standpoint because nobody's going to wear a one piece if they like his jersey. So I was thinking that on the business side, like, okay, well, if they're going to be buying his shirt, buying his clothes, they would probably have it as a two piece. That way people can buy it and still wear it as normal clothing. And this is still a little bit more laid back than a normal sports battle. So I added some cheesy lightning bolts. Those always help sell that flashy design, whether it's fire or lightning or things like that. That's just the generic thing, but it seemed to fit really well here because he is going for that flashy look and he is trying to have that selling point because he's the superstar. He likes the attention. He likes all the pizzazz. He likes the flashing lights and things like that. And I give him that cocky smirk. Wanted to make sure his eyes had the look. He needed to be a very attractive character. I wanted him to be superstar. Everybody wants him. Everybody wants to be him. They buy all of his merch and things like that. And then of course having the captain be a really nice moose and having the hyena be a brawler. It's just a very nice mix. You have offense, defense, and then the flashiness of it all. And it all mixes together really well. These are three strong characters that can be thrown in and you know who they are. You believe them. You don't need a backstory. You already get the gist of where they came from and how they work. So I go for that track star look and I keep it lean, tight, and give him a lot of freedom so he has movement. And movement is a very important thing when it comes to combat. These kind of details are really important when it comes to functionality for me. I used to be a b-boy and breakdance, as you can call it, and the biggest issue for me was always mobility. So I definitely take time to make sure things would make sense or are comfortable for characters who are flexible or plan on moving around a lot. We tighten up some of these designs on the rabbit now, finalizing some details, giving them some cheesy lightning bolts, and helping them sell the design. Then we finish it off with a matching haircut, which also has the lightning design in it. I start detailing his outfit a bit, and you'll see here in a moment, I don't really know where I want to go with the logo design because these are going to be jerseys. So it crosses my mind that I want to go ahead and make that a material. So again, touching on materials, I mentioned earlier I drag and dropped in some materials that I had already previously set up. These are just some basic body shapes that I like to use to help design things. But in a moment, I'm going to go into depth on how to design and how to upload and make an image material for yourself, which is really useful, and you'll probably end up using it a lot more than you actually expect. I use it for signatures, I use it for logos, I use it for body shapes or simple poses that I'm going to use a whole bunch, especially when it comes to references or creating a reference sheet. Oh, and always remember, save often, Control S. Saves you a lot of pain and time. All right, so getting into this design, I actually came up with this name on the spot for the team. Since their owner is a major part of the story, I wanted to incorporate his love for music somehow. Sound bites happened to pop up in my head while I was working, and I thought it was pretty clever. It incorporates a little bit of the music, and it also incorporates bites, and they're anthropomorphic. You know, it makes sense with a team. Has a nice little catchy thing to it. I won't go too... I wanted to keep this sporty and still have strong colors. You end up using the outline function in the layer properties tab to give a border, which I'll go over again whenever I get to that point. Here I'm just using a symmetry ruler. You can find that in the ruler section. It's really useful. Just drag and drop it onto your work, and you can delete the ruler later or hide it if you want to come back and use it again. So I get a little general sketch going here. I get the symmetry ruler out and I start to outline, and I do some really thick border, and I have some teeth. This is a very generic design. I'm not going to sit here and work on this design right now or go into detail about how to get this design to be the way it is, or creating logos. That's a whole different video or a whole different tutorial, is going into logo design. But I did need this to be properly done and look nice for a few reasons. One, it's going to be on the logo for the clothing. I don't want to draw it 3 times, so let's just draw it once, save it as an image material, and we can drag and drop it in. 2, once it's done and I color it, I have a general idea for the colors, but I'll also have a thing I can throw on flags, banners, background elements. There's going to be other no-name characters in this series that have the shirt on or are part of the team that aren't going to have like actual official designs. So it'll be nice to just be able to throw this on, or to be able to reuse this as a recycled image in the background, such as banners in the city or something like that, since they are a pro team. So this actually saves me a lot of time in design elements in the future. So here I'm just trying to get some colors down. Gold and red are very strong colors and always a nice color palette to go to, but I play around with some different things just to see what looks good from far away. I end up going with gold and red, and I don't end up liking the font. So I end up actually looking up some fonts and trying to put something together myself, which ends up coming out pretty nice. I looked up some generic Jersey font. You can find that kind of stuff everywhere. And once I have that done, I'm ready to go. And I start messing with the sound part of it and just try to make that look nice. This kind of stuff doesn't have a lot to do with combat, but this is, you could just take this as like extra. But it is important to have different kinds of fonts when it comes to using font. Like, you don't want to just use the same font all the time for one design. You want to play around with some different fonts, or try to write some stuff with the calligraphy brush, or just use it yourself or do it yourself and draw out the letters. But again, this is just a little quick tutorial on setting up a logo, doing image materials. You can use these image materials for everything. I might even use this as a shirt for sale in the shop. So if you'd like to support Kiwi Punch, check out kiwipunchcomic.com/shop, or just go to the page and you'll find the shop. And you can actually buy some of the clothes and stuff that shows up in the story. Since Nessie does like to make clothing in the story, it's actually a perfect way to mix that in. So if you like some of the clothing and stuff that you see in Kiwi Punch, check out the site. You might actually find some of the gear that you actually think is pretty cool. So here I go to the layer properties, and you can find the outline tool. This is actually a really useful tool that I didn't even know about at first. But you can use that, give it different kinds of outlines. You can also play with it, change the layer that you're outlining, and make all sorts of cool effects with it. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the image material and quick discussion on that, and we get back to designing. Alright, so here I'm just taking the logo and we're going to slam it on all our jerseys. I get those laid down and shaped using the transform tool, and if you want to use the transform tool quickly, you can hold control and drag it in a certain direction and it will free transform. This is really useful if you're just trying to do a quick edit and it doesn't need to be perfect. Otherwise, I would say you could reshape it yourself using the liquify tool, which is also a new function on clipstudio, and it's really useful. So here I just change it to monochrome or black and white. I rough in some letters really quick and decide to change those letters and use a font, which is the same font that I use for the logo. And I just try to get some letters slapped on there so it looks more like a jersey. These are just little details and design elements that can really help bring together your outfits. Whether you're adding on numbers, letters, trying to make modern wear like I'm doing here, or fantasy wear, you can think of little details. What would you like on a clothing? What would you like on a robe? Let's say you're an archer. You would like something on there for little pockets. Pockets are always useful. You can use that to really build a design and get those little details filled in there. And that's really important when it comes to outfits, clothing, and gear. So, speaking of outfits, clothing, and gear, for comics, it's important to use black, and I start laying down blacks here. And it's important to have contrast to your outfits. You can use white lines to show details if you need to, or just leave it a solid black. Some artists might just use dark value to represent black as well, like 75% gray. This just comes down to personal preference, but do keep in mind the colors of an outfit will affect the shape and the vibe the character gives off. So when creating outfits for characters, it can be really fun to get carried away. I have a somewhat realistic design for these characters, and it's very modern in this comic, but I have dabbled in high fantasy, tech, space, just a little bit of everything when you get into commissions and stuff like that. But what always matters to me though is the design elements. Does it give off a certain look? Does it sell a design? Does it give the character personality? Always ask yourself these kind of questions when you're designing. These are all things you should think about during the process. Since these are combative characters, the final look really needs to depict three things here: their fighting style, their role on the team, and their personality. Of course, these vary depending on the character, of course, but for these, it's what matters the most. Gear, equipment, weapons are also big factors and follow the same rules. The more time you can save explaining a character in a comic, the better. Sometimes you do want an air of mystery around someone, or like those are of course important to have. But since these three will not be making appearances later in the story, I need to have clear designs that really make sense. In these capture the flag matches, weapons are allowed, but they're scattered through the arena, so having specified weapons can be tricky. The mace that the hyena uses is definitely going to play a big part in the design since they're the brawler. It'll be a highlight of the character, and the crowd knows when they manage to grab it that it's game over like most of the time. So this is a great story like building technique and can even build tension. Will they get the mace? If they do, will the characters be able to defeat them? Why is this this is why designing and thinking ahead can really change dynamics. So again, that comes into playing with the design here, like I'm doing for the hyena. I want to show off the muscles, I want to show off the structure and the build. And I want them to have this aura that like if they hit you with that mace, you're going down and it's over. I need like a little bit of that athletic look, so I crop the pants. I don't make them all the way down because I want all the looks to differ, and I already decided that the moose would wear like long pants, like full-blown pants. I do put the little bit of the logo, like the teeth marks, on the side of the pants. That's just clothing design, and that comes into a whole different video. But those little things add. By adding those little teeth on there, it adds a little bit of sharpness to it. It makes her look, it makes them look a little bit scarier. It makes them look a little bit more intimidating. It's a little bit flashy, but not too much. It shows a bit more of the raw side. They do have the knee pads on those pants. I get that from the football designs. And they're also going to be wearing these fingerless gloves. I thought it would make more sense so that they have a little bit more grip since they are a weapon specialist, and that does come into play during the combat. Again, functionality is a very important part. You can put gloves on just for the sake of looks. That's totally fine too, but just think about the functionality and whether or not it would work. For instance, if you're using long fingered gloves, but your character does very meticulous light touches magic or something, like all of their magic requires them to use light touching or something like that. I don't really know, but that's something you want to think about with functionality. So with that in mind, I actually moved to the moose here and I start designing his outfit. And for his outfit, I wanted him to have longer sleeves to really accentuate the length of his arms. And I also gave that same collar to all of the jerseys to kind of give it a bit of a sporty look. So it's almost like a turtleneck, but not quite. And then I also give them the baseball tee kind of deal where from the collar and the shoulder down, it's like all a different color. And that really sells the whole sporty athletic t-shirt look. Again, we're going to add knee pads to his pants. His pants are going to be the full extended version of the pants. And I think that it's actually important when you have different kinds of legs is to play around with different kinds of outfits for those kind of legs. Especially the defensive players. Like you can see the two brawler defensive characters have a little bit more meat on them. They have like the wrist guards, the gloves, they have the knee pads, they have a little bit thicker shoes, while the speedster, he's got barely anything on his legs, barely anything on his arms. He's very aerodynamic. And that comes into play. That's where the design comes in, and it's kind of fun. You'll start to enjoy doing this design process. At first, it might be a little hard to apply all these things, but it just becomes fun over time. I give them some sort of basketball shoes. They're not really like a brand or anything like that. They're just kind of like a generic look that gives you a basketball kind of vibe. But also makes sense because since he is tall, he would have ankle support on his legs. So you could tighten up the straps and that would give him some ankle support. And this is where combat is so important to me, and functionality is because if it doesn't make sense, I'm not going to waste my time putting it in the design. Unless it's just for looks. So yeah, we're just finalizing these designs. We're using our toning to build some contrast, which I will go into toning a little bit after this. This is just the generic blacks that you slap down. I'll go into the actual grays and stuff like that in the next part. But with him, I actually was thinking also I need to have a very fitting hairstyle. At first, I was thinking dreads. At one point, I was thinking curls. And I ended up going with the curls. And I'm actually glad I did, as you'll see later in the video, because it actually plays a really cool dynamic with the look whenever he's in combat. Because he's got this big, fluffy hair flowing behind him. And it really builds his upper half to look really huge. And you got to remember, this character is huge. Even the rabbit is still like 5'8", 5'10". So the hyena is like 6'2", 6'5", somewhere around there. And then the moose would be about 8 feet, maybe 9 feet with his antlers. So he's going to be towering over people. And of course, in artwork, you can exaggerate that. So I'm going to draw him really, really big compared to other characters, even if it's not realistic size-wise. But yeah, I ended up going with some curly, kind of fluffy hair. It's simple, it's easy to draw, but it does give him a very big feel, which is really nice. All right, so we're going to get into toning. Toning, I'll keep this section pretty brief, as it may or may not apply to you in your design process. Some people like to leave things black and white. Some may do color. For these designs, I do not expect them to ever be in color unless I do a color spread, digital wallpaper, or a poster or something like that. When that time comes, I can easily come back and color this though. For toning, I have a few percent values ready and saved in my color set. You can edit your color set to fit your needs by selecting a color and right-clicking a color block. You can replace the color there and have a nice color set for use. You can find that over in the left-hand section right underneath your color wheel, and you can customize and save different color palettes, which is going to streamline a lot of your work process for you, especially if you're doing color or using characters that are going to be used over and over again. You can just save all of their color palettes, load it up, draw and drag and drop them in, and you'll save yourself a lot of time. For my comic, I keep it to 3 tones. 75%, 50%, and 35%. And having those gray values like that they just look the best to me. I played around with a lot of stuff for chapter 2. Chapter 1 was only one value. I think it was like 55%. But for chapter 2 and onwards, I'm going to be using 75%, 50%, and 35%. I have these character sheets saved in a reference page that I keep up on a second monitor so I can streamline my workflow. Saving time is key when doing comments or comics or even commissions. A little tip when selecting your tones, keep in mind how it will look in motion. Having a character in all 100% black looks cool at times, but remember you need to show the motion really well. It could be done, of course, like there's plenty of artists you can watch or look at that do it really well. But just keep an eye out for things that you can really show off well. If I have a black weapon and their outfit is black, make sure you use white lines or little cool tricks to show the silhouettes and shapes of things. But it also can be used to save yourself some time, so keep that in mind. Whatever you're after, just make sure you think about it when you're finalizing some designs. So here I'm just giving them the numbers. At first I give them 1, 2, and 3, but it's too generic and it doesn't make sense. And in most sports, your first number depicts your position. Usually like 40s, 30s is like linebacker position in football. So I just go with that and just give them different numbers. And we have our tones pretty much done and they're ready to go. So I'm going to take these tones and actually get into our next part. Combat style, motion, and visual setups. Next, I want to touch on what I consider to be equally as important when it comes to combat-oriented characters, the actual combat. I won't usually do a full page of sketches unless they are a major character, but I'll still rough out a few things just to get a feel for them. It's important not to just leave a design at the base phase like we just finished. When working with a team, or even if you're working alone like I do, it's really nice to have a few sketches to refer to. I want to be able to jump into some work and just glimpse over at this page and say, oh, okay, speed, power, defense. Sometimes laying down those concepts with some sketches can reveal some issues with the design as well. Such as here with Jordan, I start sketching him out and you can see I started actually sketching his full arm, but he has a missing arm. So that's something that I'm not used to. I'm not used to drawing that missing arm. So when I'm designing this pose or I'm sketching out this pose, I have to think about that and I have to change my design element. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a flaw, but it's something to keep in mind. So if I'm moving his body and he does not have an arm there, if I'm trying to use that arm to hide something or to show motion, I need to do it in a certain way. So that's very important that when you have these designs and you finish these designs, that you try them out and use them in motion. Now, of course, this varies. Sometimes you are not doing comics or you're just doing a one pose commission, but that still is very important when you're creating these poses on how you're going to design these characters and how you're going to use these characters and how they look while in motion and what you can change to make them look better in motion. So for instance, what if he only had a missing arm, or he had that missing arm, but his hair was really long on the right side? It would hide the fact that he's missing an arm, and it wouldn't translate well into a lot of the designs and the poses that he would be put into. But those are things that you think about when it comes to storyboarding and setting up these combat characters or combat oriented characters is how do they move? How do they look while in motion? And that's why it's important that if you can spare a little time is to sketch them out. See how they feel. Same as a car. Like the car might look really nice, but does it function right? Is it going to drive good? Does the tail fin on the car or whatever it's called make the car work better? Does the sword's functionality, it's super cool and super long, but if the person's 5 foot, is he going to be able to swing it? And if he does swing it, how does it look? Does it scrape across the ground? All right, so Logan the Moose has a large build and long arms. I wanted to translate that in a scene and give off this immense defensive aura, and that could be done with some perspective tricks and warping of the body. This is where that early thought and design really shines. His arms are coming into play here, and I'm happy with how it's working. Giving him the fluffy long hair as well can really build up his shape, and I'm pleased with how it's coming out. Sometimes you may go for something like this and feel like something is missing whenever you're doing the design. For instance, it wouldn't have had the same effect if he wasn't a moose. So maybe I draw this and I realize, oh man, he needs to be more top heavy. That's where I'd maybe change the design to fit. Let's say you have an armor, right, and it feels a little lacking in the area. So maybe you put some feathers or some fur on it to give it an extra shape to the silhouette. Like maybe the character doesn't have this scary factor to them, so you need to add a little bit to the silhouette or the shapes to really give off the vibe that you're trying to get and help sell it. A good example is also these horns. Like if he wasn't a moose, let's say he was just a giant horse with long arms, which would be totally fine as well. It wouldn't have the same impact if his horns and antlers or whatever weren't there. Like the hair helps sell that. The hair and the antlers being so big, it makes him look so top heavy, and he's almost like a tree. Like it just is a big tree in your way. You can't get by that. That's a big part of the design and something you want to think about before you start creating that character, or even after when you're playing around with stuff. Like something to think about is if this character was short and he had these kind of big horns and the hair flowing around like that, it would look kind of weird and it wouldn't work on the design very well because it would hide any characters that are standing behind him. So if he's standing in front of like hyena or something and they're the same height, it would hide the design behind all of his stuff. And you don't want to hide another character's designs just because you didn't size them properly or things like that. And that sometimes will happen. I've done a couple character sheets where I didn't really like the character and I've redrawn it 4 or 5 times. Or I'll finish the design completely and I love it and I go and take it into a storyboarding scenario. I'm fleshing out the character and I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. This person has a belt around their waist. And if they tried to do kicks like they like to do, where the belt is that's attached to their thigh, it would restrict their movement. And then when I was drawing it, I was like, this doesn't work. And sometimes it just doesn't look good either. For instance, I have another character who's really, really buff and strong and big and burly, and he's supposed to be really scary. And when I drew him with the shape that I originally had for him, which was still very big and buff, it didn't have this scary feel compared to the character he was fighting. The character he's fighting is just as buff and strong and scary, but a little bit smaller. But it didn't come off right. So I have to redraw it and I had to rechange the shape of this character so that he was bigger and had that intimidating factor and had this raw essence of power because he outscaled one of the main characters. And that's something you sometimes won't see until you start playing with the character and trying to draw them in different scenarios or shapes. And that just comes with experience and a lot of playing around with things. So lastly, I play around with Alexi using the mace. When it comes to weapons, you really want to play around with the character using said weapon just to see how the motion would feel. At first, I kind of drew it with a little bit of a curve, like a hyper exaggerated, oh, she's swinging it, or they're swinging it. And then whenever they swing it, it didn't look right to me. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go back and fix that. I got the muscles down and built around the shirt. So it's important. These sketches may or may not be used in the comic storyboarding, but it's important to feel how a character moves. Do they use big swings, small swings? Do they have a finesse behind their movements that you want to try to portray? Are they elegant, raw, or do they use a more tactical approach? Do their designs help sell movement? Maybe they're fast with an elegant sword technique. In that situation, I'd probably play around with something that's long, flowing scarf or garment to make the movement seem better if they're that fast, so that it looks cool when the thing sways behind them. These are little things that come into play during motion and visual setups, and why I recommend doing them. And I recommend everybody play around with your designs that you have. If you already have a design, if you're creating a design, play around with the movement. Sometimes I'll even start with these kind of character sketches or movement sketches or visual setups and motion setups to help design the character. Like, I'll draw the body moving that way first, and then I'll think, what would look cool here? Would a scarf look cool on Jordan, the rabbit, flowing behind him? Absolutely. But would it make sense for the combat? No, because if he's running from somebody and he's playing capture the flag, they're going to yank on his scarf. He's going to go down. They don't get the point. So I streamlined his outfit. And that's something that you can see whenever you're doing these designs and slapping it down really fast like this. For Alexi here, I have a little bit of smoke in the background. I was like, oh, I really want to show the impact, and I want to show how raw their movements are. They don't use a finesse. They don't use a nice technique. They're just really raw. I want to slam this and destroy this. So I wanted to show that their body would be up in the air, and they don't care about defending themselves while in midair. They only care about slamming it down as hard as they can. And that's just something that you play with. And then whenever you get into doing the comics and start drawing out combat scenes, this makes your life a lot easier. You understand how the character works, and you can really just put it all together. All right, so this is pretty much the outro. I'm done with this piece. I'm done with these designs. I'm slapping on some image materials that I've already saved and just trying to get something that look nice and put it on there. And eventually, I think I slap on some tones here to kind of build composition for the scene at the bottom. But I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I have others on my YouTube channel, and you can get early peeks at them by subscribing to my Patreon. You can find all those links on the official Kiwi Punch site. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in a comment below or message me. I'm always happy. I'm always happy to help how I can. Combat characters can be very complex when you're designing them, but they are some of the most fun and they're just a blast to do. So don't be scared to hop into trying them. I hope you learned a few things or picked up some ideas for your own concepts. Share them with me if you like. I enjoy reviewing or checking out others' work, and I want everybody else to get better at art too, because if you guys are good at art, I get to read more comics. It's a win-win. Like I said, if you want to check out the script and everything below and want to follow along, you can find that in the link below. And I appreciate you guys coming through and checking out this video. And I hope you guys have a great day. Drink plenty of water, and let's boogie. Peace.